Time to bust out the metric wrenches, boys and girls. Today, this idiot's going to be working on a Mazda. Yes, a Mazda. I don't even know if I have any 10mm sockets anymore, but I'm exactly this kind of idiot. This is my wife's 2013 Mazda CX5. It's a nice little sport utility vehicle. She bought it new back in 2012, I think, actually. It's got 94,000 miles on it. It's been a very good car, actually. For a little small sport utility, the thing gets, I don't know, 32, 33 miles per gallon average everywhere. So it's been a pretty reliable little steed in the fleet. So it's got a little bit of a seep, a little bit of a coolant leak around the thermostat housing. I looked online. These have a rubber O-ring gasket like many of them do. So I'm assuming that that is failing. So I bought a new one. So we're going to be pulling off the thermostat housing and checking out what's going on. I'm sure that it's something that seems simple, but it's going to be worse than it usually is. But, you know, when you turn an idiot loose under the hood of a Japanese car, bad things are probably going to happen. All right, let's take a look under the hood, see what we're looking at. This is Mazda's SkyActiv engine, which is a naturally aspirated engine. It has no turbos, no superchargers. It's only a 2-liter, I believe. But it makes pretty decent power for its size. I really respect Mazda for having such a small engine without any sort of boost. So taking a look, the thermostat housing, let's see here. It's right down there where that silver bolt head is. So we're going to be digging into that. Looks like we're going to have to take off some of the air cleaner apparatus. And whatever this is probably a computer or a body control module. Probably going to have to loosen that, get that out of the way a little bit to get down there to the bolts. But if you look closely, if this will focus, you can see a little rim of green seepage around that thermostat housing. And that's the source of our problems. The car has not been overheating, but you can smell a little bit of coolant when it's hot and you park it. And that's just not going to be acceptable for much longer. Okay, so the first thing I think we're going to do is take off these two 10mm bolts. Seems to be the bracket that might be holding this, this computer module in. Perhaps we'll have to tackle this one as well. First thing though, we got to find the most elusive creature in all of automotive repair. The 10mm socket. Yes, that's an actual 10mm socket. It's the legend. Be sure to show this to your friends. Don't be hating because I found my 10mm that quickly. You too could have one if you just go to the store, buy one, and then immediately lose it. Seems to come out of the bracket. That seems to be the next one to take off. It also was a 10mm. Looked like it needed a deep socket, but I was able to take it off with just regular 1/4-inch drive 10mm socket. Another one back here, same drill, just a regular depth socket seems to get it free. I'm sure some of you are like really excited that I don't know what this computer is, but there is definitely a computer here. Is it engine management? Is it body power management? I don't know. Don't really care. All right, that seems to have loosened it up. Let's see if we can lift this thing out of the way. Let's see, there's some wires. I think I'm going to have to release this wire to get enough slack to get it out of the way. Push this little tab right here down, and then the whole lock moves up out of the way. Okay, that comes out. Probably need to be really careful not to get much dirt or crud inside of that port. We'll blow it out before we put this back together. All right, that got it up. I'll just set it back over there on top of the battery, which the terminals are covered, so I feel pretty good about that. Still need to remove some of this other stuff here, this plastic needs to go. Looks like we need to pull this bolt right down here to get this, looks like a sheath or a conduit for some cabling. Get that out of the way next. Looks like another 10mm job. Let's see if that works. Yep, that's got it. Let's spin that there. Get that free. There we go. Okay. This might be our next candidate for removal. Let's see what this one does. Yeah, it's 10mm. You know, that's one thing I do have to give modern cars, or at least import cars, is it seems like they're very consistent with their use of 10mm, which is why the 10mm socket and wrench is such a rare creature. Because I think without a 10mm, you can't work on anything imported, because everything is 10mm. That 10mm socket I was telling you was so crucial. Yeah, it fell down inside the car somewhere, but I think I see it. Let's see, I think it's right. Oh, see it right down. I have to go get my retriever tool. Stand by. La. Okay, so what's holding it up is underneath this bracket, there's a little plastic clip. It's kind of strange. It has a screw holding it on and then a plastic clip too. So I need to pop that up, like so. And let's see if that kind of helps out the situation here. Yeah, I think we're getting free. Let's work this up and out of the way. There's a second harness holding it in front of the battery, but I think we can swing it. There we go. All right. That's probably going to be as good as we can get for access. We might have to pull the battery, but I'm going to see if we can not pull the battery. This right there is the top bolt for the thermostat. I can't see the bottom bolt, which must be under it, probably opposed to it. I'm going to reach down there and try to get the ratchet on that first. I always believe take off the hard one first. That way if you run into trouble or you can't get to it, you haven't put yourself in a position where you have to put a bolt back and reassess the situation like an idiot. So let's go underneath and see if we can find this bolt. Yep, my extension is too long to make the angle, so let me get a shorter extension. Well, that's a tight fit. Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna need to do something different here. I might have to pull a battery if I can't get this thing to latch onto that lower bolt that I can't see. Okay, well, I found a combination to get on the bolt and I've broken it loose, but I need to stop. First off, what I had to do, because I don't have a short quarter extension, was to get my 3/8 to quarter adapter and put it on my 3/8 ratchet. That allowed me to get on the head finally and bust it loose. So I don't think I'm gonna have to pull off the battery tray or anything else. But I did realize I'm about to make a big rookie mistake. When you're an idiot, you start taking off thermostat housings without remembering you're going to make a huge mess with all the coolant on the floor. So let's drain the coolant down a little bit. Oh, it can never be easy. Modern cars and all their plastic cladding. All right, let's see what we got to take off to get to the drain valve. Let's start with this one. This looks like a pretty good suspect. Whenever they put a little tiny hatch door in there, it's a good sign that maybe they're making it easier to access a maintenance port, like an oil filter or something. Let's see. Why, there it is. Good job, Mazda. All right, let's get a drain pan. Mistakes have been made. I loosened up the plug enough out of the back of the petcock that when I opened the radiator cap to relieve the pressure, the vacuum, I left the plug too loose. It flew clean out. It's somewhere up above this tray now. And it just shot antifreeze all over. Super excited that I tried to keep this from getting messy. Okay, I went ahead and pulled out the battery because it was just too hard to reach those lower bolts. And now that I've got the battery out, I think I'm gonna have to pull out the tray too, because this plastic thing is in the way. So these are 12mm bolts. Looks like there's 3 of them. I'm gonna zip these out and see if I can get the tray out. Things have escalated quickly. I had to take out the battery. I had to take out the air cleaner box in the front, which requires 2 screws up here in the firewall. And then the lower part of the box that the air filter sits in has several studs like this and this that just pop into rubber grommets. So that releases the bottom of the air cleaner. That's the top. We'll just stow that out of the way. As you can see, we're making some progress here. Now all of this is just to get the battery tray out, and the battery tray now is getting loose. I think we've got all the connections out, and what do we got down here? We've got all kinds of stuff. There's the positive cables up to the battery. There's a piece of wire on the loom that's going from here across the tray. That's going to require some wrestling to get out. But other than that, I think we're free. Okay, we can finally get in here to the bolts. We can definitely see a lot of evidence of antifreeze or coolant leaking around the thermostat housing. Now we can see both bolts, upper and lower. So let's get our 7mm wrench on those and see if I can get those out real quick. Okay, it wasn't a 7, it was an 8. So we swapped out our wrench. All right, we got the bottom one loose. Well, that certainly seems tight. Sometimes maybe the bolt has just worked its way loose. And last summer, we took it on a trip to Death Valley in June. Now, that's not a very nice thing to do to a car. And we had the AC on and we were cruising at 75 and the outside temp was something like 115, 116. And I figured it was a pretty good test of the cooling system. I know not to trust gauges on modern cars because they're really not measuring the temperature. They're just telling you what you need to stay happy. I assumed that they would show a high reading when things really started getting to be problematic, but the gauge never moved. And that night, or actually it was the next morning before we took off again from Pahrump, Nevada. Beautiful town. Good place to be from. Anyway, I checked the coolant before we left the hotel and found evidence that the overflow tank had been burping on the engine. So it did get hot enough that it was burping coolant. And maybe that's what happened. Maybe it got hot enough that it kind of pushed the seal out a little bit. Let's see. Oh, we still got the bottom bolt. No? What's going on? Oh, there's a third bolt. There is a third bolt on the back. Let's attend to the third bolt that we still can't see. There we go. I do have a new thermostat too. I figured I'd throw in here since we're going all this trouble. Why leave in a quality OEM part when I can put in an inferior aftermarket part and do this again in 4 or 5 months? Okay. That doesn't look too bad. I don't feel any lifts or cracks, so let's pull that out. We'll take a closer look at that rubber seal. There's the gasket. Visually, it doesn't look too bad. Let me pull it off and inspect it. We'll take a closer look. So this is the only slight damage I can see. There's some very, very small dimples in the rubber seal right there at that point. But there's no cracks or tears and there's no flaws anywhere else on it. So at the minimum, it'll be good to throw in that new seal. But let's take a look at the mating surfaces and the housing and see if there's any damage there. I'm looking at the thermostat housing. It's plastic with these steel sleeves that prevent you from over-torquing or breaking it, apparently. And rubbing my finger on it, I don't feel any imperfections. Don't see any imperfections. I tried to take it off the hose, but that's the original equipment hose, and that thing is bonded to that plastic, so we're just going to leave that alone. Looking at the block housing where the thermostat goes, same thing. Don't feel or see any damage. Lots of evidence of the seepage, this green crust. So I'm going to go with that little gasket. That tiny flaw under pressure must have just been allowing the pressure to escape enough to make that ooze. There was never even an active drip under the car, so it was always just sort of a steam and vapory ooze, which would, I guess, make sense for such a small flaw in the gasket. So let's get this cleaned up. We'll check it one more time and get it back together. It seems to be a pretty snug fit in the ring. The rubber is slightly raised over the surface of the block casting, so I would think that's going to make a good sandwich with the housing. Okay, there it is. We got all the bolts in, all three of them on the housing. The torque specs on that are supposed to be about 6 or 7 foot-pounds. I don't have a 1/4 inch torque wrench, so I eyeballed it. Probably went a little too snug, but I don't think that can hurt because there's metal sleeves inside that plastic housing, and at some point you're just pushing that up against the threads in the block. I mean, you go much harder, I'd worry that you'd strip or break a bolt off in that block, but I certainly didn't get close enough to that point. So I watched very carefully too as I put those threads in to make sure that they were going in straight and that the gasket didn't like walk out or do anything weird, and then tighten them in sequence going around and around. So I think that's about as good as I can hope to get. I'm going to go ahead and soak up the coolant that did spill. Otherwise, I won't know if it's leaking or not. I mean, I guess I could smell it, but it's always disconcerting to see coolant up on these pockets of the transmission when you're waiting to make sure your repair worked. Time will tell. There certainly shouldn't be anything catastrophic, just because, just like the old one, if I've got some rubber sandwiched in between those two pieces, it's going to have some built-in resistance to any huge leaks. So we'll just see over time if we continue to smell antifreeze and that the fluid level is dropping. It was very slow drop, but it was dropping. All right, we got to put that clamp back on up here and start buttoning this thing back up. Okay, about 10 or 15 minutes later, we got it all back together. Got the battery in, got the proper routing of the wire looms and harnesses, got the computer back in, the bolts are there, got the air inlet hose back on and tightened, the air filter box is all reinstalled, got the screws in up here at the air inlet, and I think everything's good to go. We're going to go ahead and add some coolant to this thing. I notice I'm filling the radiator instead of filling the coolant overflow reservoir first. It's because I drained it, the radiator. So let's get that filled up. We'll add a little bit to the coolant reservoir, and then the first time it's up to operating temperature, we'll check the coolant reservoir and see if it needs a little more antifreeze. Of course, if it needs more, it's going to draw from the reservoir as the engine heats up. But if we don't fill the radiator first and we just fill the coolant reservoir to full, it's going to suck that in, and it will definitely need more antifreeze very quickly. By the way, I did look up the specs on Mazda coolant. It requires a special specification that seems to be covered by these universal mixes, 50-50. I don't like buying mixes usually, but it's getting to where that's all you can do. And it's really not a whole lot of cost difference if you do the separate ones. Okay, fellow idiots, I do have a question. So last summer when the car overheated, and I did add a little bit of fluid at Death Valley, I looked it up online, and what I wound up buying was this universal antifreeze and coolant 50-50 mix. It's the yellow colored one, and everything I saw on the internet said this would work fine. It occurred to me as I was adding this little bit I had left on the top that what came out of the car was the green coolant, and what I put in is the yellow coolant. And I'm seeing in the label, I guess they can mix. I'm hoping they can mix, because only an idiot would put the wrong type of coolant on top of the right type of coolant, correct? Hey, what could possibly go wrong? Well, I guess that'll do it for today, fellow idiots. Let's see if this thing goes. I have a feeling it's going to be just fine. This thing's got a lot of zoom left in it, and we're going to hit the roads until it pops. So if I made any mistakes, or if you think I am truly a colossal idiot of astounding proportions, please leave a comment down below and tell me all about it. Till later. Bye.